Hello, everyone. Hi, Story County Democrats. I'm sorry that we cannot be together in person today. I hope you're all staying home and staying safe as much as you can. If you are a person that has a job where you cannot stay home, thank you for going out into the world. I hope that you're able to protect yourself, and thank you for doing your essential work. We all really, really appreciate it. So, I wish I could be there with you in person. I really miss shaking everyone's hand and seeing everybody smile. Just P.S. By the way, we're going to be releasing a campaign video later today that I hope you'll be able to watch. That is kind of a montage of a lot of the in-person events that we've attended since last May, I guess it's been, as we've campaigned. So anyway, I'll get right into this so that you don't have to spend too much time in front of your screen. I know we're already spending a lot of time in front of our screens anyway. I'm Kimberly Graham. I'm running for United States Senate to replace Joni Ernst. I will give you the Super Reader's Digest version of my life story and then get to your questions, because I always prefer to answer your questions rather than talk at you. I believe the job of a U.S. Senator is to listen, and listen some more. Find out what the people that you say you want to represent, find out the things they need to live lives of health and dignity, and then go to Washington, D.C. and do your very best to advocate for those things. So, who I am and why I'm doing this. So 20 years ago, I was very fortunate to give birth to my son, Max. So for 20 years, I've been a mom. And also for those same 20 years, I was 9 months pregnant when I took the bar exam. I've been an attorney, and I've primarily been an attorney for abused or neglected kids and for parents in the juvenile courts. And I've also been a divorce mediator, so I've spent 17 years doing some divorce mediation as well. And I think if anybody could use a mediator, it's the United States Senate. So I hope to put my skills to good use. When you're a really good mediator, you learn a lot about human nature, and you learn a lot about how to most skillfully have people listen and be able to hear you. You learn to do things like avoid labels and buzzwords that tend to make people put walls up in front of them, in front of themselves pretty immediately. And you learn to tell stories and talk about values, because that's how human beings really connect to each other best. So I'll tell you a little tiny bit about my growing up years. My dad is one of 15 siblings here from central Iowa, and my mom was a teenage mother, and my dad went out to Southern California to live with an older brother. He joined the Marine Corps, and I was born at the Camp Pendleton Marine Corps base in Oceanside, California. My grandmother on my mother's side is from Blue Earth, Minnesota. She spent all her summers in Ziering, Iowa on my great-great-grandparents' farm. And my paternal grandmother is from Mount Ayr. I lived in Indianola for 26 years, and now I live on the south side of Des Moines. Moved here to be closer to work after my son went away to college. What else? My dad is a lifelong union member. He is was a member of the Pile Drivers Union and lifelong construction worker. My mom went back to school, got her GED, and found a good union job. She was a Communication Workers of America union worker and worked for the phone company all of her career. And my parents divorced when I was 13. Things got a lot harder financially at that point, and I went to work. I've been working since I was 14 years old, with the exception of a couple of months off when I had my son. And I'm grateful for all of the different jobs that I had, because I think it's really important now that I find myself running for United States Senate. I think it's very valuable and important that I have worked my way through college, worked my way through law school. I think it's valuable that I have a lot of student loan debt. Valuable because I understand what that's like in a way that somebody without student loan debt can't understand. And I've been a waitress. I've cleaned houses for a living. I've run errands for a living. And for 13 years, I was an international flight attendant with American Airlines. And I was also a volunteer union organizer. So my grandfather was a union member, my stepdad is a union member, and my son's father is an IBEW electrician. All that to say, I know the importance of unions and how valuable they are. And that's one of several top priorities as a United States Senator that I would have, is to expand and strengthen unions in various ways. So I want to get into your questions because I prefer to answer your questions. You can go to KimberlyForIowa.com to read more in the About Kimberly section if you want to know more about me. And also, always feel free to email me a question directly or any questions you have. My email address is Kimberly@KimberlyForIowa.com, Kimberly@KimberlyForIowa.com. And if you send me a question or concern, I will answer you personally. You will not get a staffer answering your questions. I make sure everybody sends those questions to me so I can communicate with you personally. So, first question, do you support a moratorium on new or expanded CAFOs until Iowa's waterways are restored to normality? And would you support legislation to restore local control over zoning and public health for all properties, including agricultural land? Yes, I support a moratorium on new or expanded CAFOs. And the corporations that did the polluting need to clean it up. And I would support that. I do not support restoring local control over zoning and public health for all properties, including agricultural land, because I believe that waterways need to remain under federal control, because the runoff and the water cycle impact the whole state and all entire regions of the United States of America. So to me, something like waterways is a federal level thing. But as far as local control over zoning, e.g., should the locality be able to say whether or not they're, for example, going to allow yet another CAFO? Yes, I believe that power should rest with localities. Healthcare. Do I support single-payer healthcare? Yes, and I'm the only United States Senate candidate who does. It's really kind of simple in the end. I believe that healthcare in a wealthy and moral nation is a fundamental human right. Human rights are not for sale. You don't get more human rights or better human rights if you have more money to buy your human rights. And if we think that healthcare is a human right, then healthcare in the United States of America, ultimately, when we get there, it will look a lot more like going to a public library than about a scary endeavor where you're never sure how much in the end you're going to end up owing to either your doctors, your hospital, your other healthcare providers. So we've all decided in this country that public libraries have value and they're important. And so we all pitch in, all of our tax money, right? We all pitch in to provide public libraries. When I go to a library, I give them my library card. I walk out with a book. I don't hand them my debit card. I don't get a bill in the mail later for that book. And yet it's not free. That's something you're never going to hear me say is free healthcare, free college, free. It's not free. It all has a cost. And I very well understand that. However, just like a public library that we've decided has value, and so we're all going to pitch in to fund that library, right? Healthcare should work the same way. I should go to a doctor, I should go to a hospital, I should hand over my healthcare card, not a debit card, and I should never get a bill in the mail. I should go and be able to receive my healthcare, whatever kind of healthcare I need, and that should be just a matter of a human right here in the United States. The next question, do I support Medicare for all? And if so, how would I argue this before my potential future Senate colleagues? And then, so this person has a note that says, remember that at least 75% of Americans polled want Medicare for all, regardless of party. Yes, I support Medicare for all, with this caveat, and it's an important one. We must ensure that the reimbursement rates are sufficient. So part of the struggle of rural hospitals especially is that there's a large proportion of elders living in our rural communities, right? And Iowa in general is a little more aged state. We have more elders in our state than a lot of other states do. And so a lot of people who go to these hospitals are our elders, and they are on Medicare. And when they get care at these hospitals, those reimbursement rates, the rates that the insurer pays to the hospital, are insufficient. So in the short term, one of the things I would be promoting and arguing for most strenuously in the United States Senate is to get up the reimbursement rates for Iowa, because they are not sufficient, and it is harming our rural hospitals. It is harming their ability to survive. Last time I checked, about 18% of our rural hospitals are at risk of closure in the near future if something doesn't change. Another reason that I am for a universal single payer or Medicare for all system is because financially it is the smartest thing to do. Our current system costs far too much. We spend about $3 trillion a year, about $3 trillion on healthcare in the United States, and fully $1 trillion of that $3 trillion goes to things like marketing and sales and appeals and denials and going back and forth. The average American doctor office per doctor spends about $84,000 a year processing insurance claims and getting pre-approvals and then denials and then trying to get it, trying to get the insurance company to cover something, and back and forth and back and forth. There's a hospital, I forget where at the moment, I want to say North or South Carolina, but regardless, that is a 900-bed hospital with 1,000 billing clerks. 900-bed hospital with 1,000 billing clerks. That is how absurd our system of healthcare is. And we need to be spending that money on care, on health care, not on insurance billing issues. And not only do we not cover everyone, but we're spending more per capita. We spend far more per person on healthcare than any other developed nation. Where do I stand on healthcare, and how do I anticipate making that happen, whether that's building up the ACA, building back up the ACA, or Medicare for all? As I mentioned, I'm for a Medicare for all universal single payer plan. That said, I like to think that, I'm very pragmatic, common sense, progressive, right? And by that I mean, I know I'm only going to be one of 100 U.S. senators, right? And I can't make the other 99 come along with me, unfortunately. However, I can develop relationships with the other 99 and do my very best to get them to come along, right? And that's exactly what you need to do. And again, that is where my mediation skills for the past 17 years can also be very helpful and come into play. Because one thing that you learn is that you have to tell stories and also provide facts. I know I can already hear some of you through the screen saying, but Republicans don't believe facts or science, or I hear you. I hear you. But a lot of times a personal story goes a really long way toward perhaps getting somebody to come along a little bit better with you. The story that I tell often, for a lot of reasons, one is because I want to make sure she's never forgotten, is I talk about Robin Stone, who was the former Delaware County Party Chair here in Iowa. And a lot of you watching this probably knew Robin Stone. If you didn't, I will just tell you that she was a force of nature. She was very progressive and very activist person who was very much for healthcare justice. In other words, making sure that every single person in the United States has healthcare as a fundamental human right. And she was diagnosed with a very aggressive, rare form of thyroid cancer last summer, and she wanted to go to the Mayo Clinic to get treatment there because that's where she figured and studied and had done her research, and she thought that those doctors there would have the best chance of being able to help her. She couldn't go there, even though she had medical insurance, because they wanted $16,000 to let her walk in the front door because it was out of network. It's out of network. And she passed away in November, I believe it was. And we'll never know whether she would have lived longer, whether she would have had a better quality of life while she was alive. We won't know. But you know what? I believe she should have had that chance to go where she believed she was going to get the best care for her particular type of cancer. And those are the kinds of stories. And there's thousands upon thousands of them, if not millions, and probably millions actually, in the United States, of similar and worse stories. So people need to hear these stories. That's really important. And as a United States Senator, that's part of my job, is to amplify those stories and make sure that they're heard. So I know I'm going to be only one of 100 senators. And if I know I don't have the votes to get a universal single payer system, I am, of course, going to do whatever I can and vote for whatever is realistic, whatever can happen, that is going to help the most people. But I will tell you that we must get to a universal single payer healthcare system, and I will do that as fast as humanly possible. Describe my strategies to promote and demand a comprehensive national health care plan, and describe how I plan to counter Joni Ernst's claim that she's fighting hard to reduce prescription drug costs. Yeah, it's very convenient that she's decided that prescription drug prices are a problem now that she's up for re-election. She's also taken $28,000 just this cycle from from the pharmaceutical industry, from pharmaceutical companies. And I plan to talk about that quite a lot. We have to remember, too, that she's voted to repeal the Affordable Care Act, I believe 7 times, somewhere in that neighborhood. And that would have left millions without insurance and put prescription drugs permanently out of reach for many Americans. That needs to be talked about over and over and over and over again. The Affordable Care Act, unfortunately, so unfortunately, I mean, I wish that it had been wildly successful at ensuring everyone at truly affordable cost. It simply isn't accurate, unfortunately. It did 3 really, really important things that we need to make sure we never lose. It did 3 really important things, right? It allowed you to keep your child on your own insurance until your child's 26. That's extremely important. It got rid of the lifetime and annual caps so that insurance companies, if you're very, very ill, can't say, oh, we already paid out $1 million this year. Sorry, you're on your own now. And the third thing that it did, of course, which may be the most important, was the pre-existing condition. So that if you have a pre-existing condition, your insurance company can't refuse to insure you because of that or kick you off insurance because of that. Let's just think about that for a minute. The absurdity of a medical insurance plan that used to allow the insurance company to exclude your actual health problems. Yeah, we'll insure you, but if you have ever had a heart attack, we're not going to insure you for a heart issue. We'll insure you, but if you have severe allergies, we're going to insure you, but if you ever have an allergy problem again, we're not going to cover that. I mean, honestly, the audacity, seriously, it's ridiculous, and it should be illegal, and thankfully now it is, but it didn't used to be. It didn't used to be. I think that one of the ways that you promote and demand a comprehensive national healthcare policy is you do it the same way any major significant human rights achievement has ever been accomplished. That is from the bottom up. What do I mean by that? I certainly can envision going around the state of Iowa, which actually we've planned to do this. We already planned to do this, and I hope we get the chance to do it leading up to November. If we win the primary, we will be doing this unless we still have all the restrictions in place regarding COVID-19. And that is, we were planning to go around the state and hold town hall meetings where we were going to screen a film called Fix It Healthcare. You can go watch this film for free online. Just go to fixithealthcare.com. This is a film about universal single-payer healthcare produced by a Pennsylvania businessman. And it is fantastic. And it kind of goes through and busts all the myths about single-payer healthcare. And one of the strongest stories in there, in my opinion, is they interviewed an American doctor who is now practicing in Canada. And she moved there because she got tired of, remember I talked about earlier, the the $84,000 a year that doctors on average are spending to just interface and deal with the healthcare, 900 some healthcare companies in the US. She got tired of it. She just wanted to practice medicine and help make people well. So she moved to Canada, and she says in this interview in this film, she's so happy practicing there. And they showed her billing clerk do the billing for one patient, and they show you in real time, and it literally took like something like less than 15 seconds. They opened the person's file on the computer, they clicked a couple spots, and the billing was done, and that's it. And that, having a universal single payer system like that, by the way, would really help rural communities, because then doctors could go practice in rural communities and know that they're going to have no problems with payment, right? They're not going to have to spend a bunch of money interfacing with insurance companies. And there's a lot of other things I want to say about rural healthcare, but that's not one of my questions right now. So I'm going to try to stick to the topic, stick to the questions. Okay, this question says, after 3 years of data about the privatization of Medicaid, an inability to get data from the MCOs about the services, and the hundreds, if not thousands, of individual and family stories about the decrease in services and supports for the most vulnerable citizens in our state, people with disabilities, what answers will you be seeking about the current status of the not improved Medicaid system in Iowa? What policies would you develop to improve the conditions for individuals and families who need Medicaid services for their health, well-being, and their participation and support in their communities? Yes. So we are doing a series of virtual events. You can go to our Facebook page or our website, kimberlyforiowa.com, to see when those are. The reason I bring this up in regards to this question is one of the forums that we are doing is a people with disabilities forum. And one of the issues we'll be talking about, I'm sure, is about privatization of Medicaid and how that has so drastically and dramatically harmed especially people with disabilities. So I'm aware of that horrific situation. There's several things that we can do on a federal level. The Medicaid currently is the privatization is a state level issue. And I know that the Democrats in the Iowa State Legislature are doing their best to fix that as fast as they can. Hopefully we flip the House. Hopefully we flip the Senate in Iowa here in 2020 as well. First of all, any single payer legislation, any single payer healthcare legislation that I would vote for, I would ensure that it does not have any waiver language that allows Iowa to get away with privatizing the entire system. Now, under a single payer system, hopefully everyone gets everything they need under that federal universal single payer healthcare system. The one that I support and promote also involves and pays for home health care so that people can stay in their homes. It pays for nursing home care, vision, dental, hearing aids, mental health care, and addiction treatment, which are investments. Those are investments we make in people so that we have everybody as well and healthy as possible in this country. I would also use, whatever leverage in my position that I would have as a United States Senator to push for the state government to release concrete numbers on Medicare privatization, the cost, the efficacy, when compared to the state managed system when we had that. And I also want to just put in a little shout out to State Auditor Rob Sand here. He hasn't, this is nothing he's told me, but I would feel very assured that Rob is doing his best to look into exactly what we're talking about here with the privatization of Medicaid. And we need to change that yesterday. Little change of topics here. We're going to talk about the environment. Do I support a Green New Deal? And if so, what elements of the Green New Deal are most pressing? Yes, I support the Green New Deal. For those who don't know, probably all of you watching this do, but if you don't know, the Green New Deal is not a law. Some people think it's a law. It's a proposed law. It's a proposed resolution. It's essentially a roadmap saying, here's where we are. Here's where we need to get. We have now, 10 years to get there, before the impact on the planet by most scientific accounts and estimates becomes irreversible. And so I believe that the New Deal part of the Green New Deal is probably the most pressing and important part. And here's why. So we have to get our emissions to net zero in a way that does not leave any workers out in the cold. We're going to need the old New Deal, that level of investment in infrastructure. As most of us know, like, for example, Iowa is has the worst bridges in the United States. Our bridges need significant refurbishing or replacing. The lock and dam system on the Mississippi needs a lot of help. We are going to have a real problem when that infrastructure fails, and it's probably soon if we don't fix it. And that is also, by the way, how we get our commodities down the Mississippi and get them on barges and get them shipped out, to their markets. And so that's important. We're going to need job training. We're going to need to have unemployment insurance for anyone who is displaced. And we're going to need to be working on those green technologies as fast as we possibly can and making investments in those. There is so much that we can do and so much that we need to do in Iowa that we can do in a way that has net zero emissions and that can get us where we need to be in regards to the climate crisis as fast as possible. And it's not an either or. We can have more union jobs, good union jobs, that are also improving the environment, right? Like, for example, we can increase our solar energy capacity here. I took a great tour, I believe it's in North Liberty, to Moxie Solar. That's a solar company headquartered here in North Liberty near Iowa City. And for starters, why aren't all of our federal and state buildings, why don't all of them have solar panels on the roof? They should. And so we need to start doing those transitions. The jobs that Moxie Solar provides are good paying jobs, very good paying jobs, and they are busy. And they need to be busier, and we need to have companies like Moxie Solar. We need Moxie to get larger, and we need more companies like Moxie Solar to exist in Iowa and all over the state. We need to increase our wind energy capacity. We're number 2 in wind in the country, which is fantastic. Actually, my son's father, as an IBEW electrician, has personally wired up a lot of windmills here in Iowa, which is something that's really cool, and so good for the environment. So we need to do more of that. Something else that we can do via the Green New Deal is to incentivize and to support farmers to grow food for Iowans. So yes, Iowa farmers growing food for Iowans. A lot of people don't know that we're one of the top states for importing food. We grow a lot of corn and soybeans, and we ship them away. And one of the things that I talked about the other night with J.D. Schulten when I was on his, and you can go check out our chat on his Facebook page, we talked about the localization of food. So that also creates a more secure nation, right? When our food sources are very localized, it also helps the environment. If we grow food and then we truck it, put it in a truck and take it down the road 5 miles instead of taking it 1,000 miles away, that is less polluting to the environment and also healthier. That food that is local and fresh is going to be more nutrient dense than some other choices that we could make. So we can grow the food here and ship it 2 miles down the road to the school, or to a nursing home, or to farmers markets. We obviously have some awesome farmers markets here, but we just need more food hubs so that we can have a distribution system for our locally grown food that we then eat locally. So there's like, that's like a 5-hour conversation. We could talk about that all day, and it's one of my favorite topics, is all of the things that we can do as an agricultural state to help mitigate the climate crisis. There's a lot. Do I favor a carbon tax and dividend? Well, either a carbon tax or a hard emissions limit would be preferable, in my opinion, to any kind of cap and trade system. Basically, cap and trade just allows corporations to get away with limitless emissions by buying up excess credits, which just basically means if you're really rich, you can pollute, and that shouldn't be. But ultimately, I think that our focus needs to be on reducing emissions, so incentivizing the reduction of emissions rather than just penalizing people to do so, because then we already have had the emissions happen. We want to avoid them. So how do I plan to keep climate change as a top issue amidst all the distractions caused by COVID-19? So just like the issues around COVID-19, like, for example, in the last several days, I've been watching news reports that have come out as a result of collecting data about who is dying, what demographics are dying at the highest rates from COVID-19. And not surprisingly, we're finding out that poorer people and people of color are dying at disproportionate rates from COVID-19. As with any issue like the climate crisis, these things are going to disproportionately impact communities of color. And again, that discussion about why is multi-pronged and is a lengthy discussion. But fundamentally, we need to just make sure that we're making people aware that these issues all tie together. And so, COVID-19 involves poverty, income inequality, sexism, racism, homophobia, just like every other crisis has, right? Every other crisis, there's different, it brings together all of these issues basically all at one time. And, just like I don't know if those of you maybe are familiar that there was a study a few years ago done about whether or not when Black people presented in the emergency department or the emergency room, it was about the rate at which they were given pain medication when they said they had pain versus the rate at which non-Black people who presented at the emergency department were given pain medication if they complained of pain. And the people of color were not given pain medication at the same rate. And one of the doctors who was in that study, when discussing it afterward, said, I honestly didn't realize I was even doing that. And we have got to keep talking about these issues and bringing them to the forefront, because unless we have the data, we can't fix it, because we truly don't know what's going on in hard numbers. By the way, I've called on Governor Kim Reynolds to collect data on the race of people who are dying from COVID-19 here in Iowa, the people that are diagnosed with it. Most states are collecting that data. Iowa is not. So how do we keep climate change as a top issue? We just keep talking about it. I mean, the tricky thing, the difficult thing about keeping the climate crisis at the forefront is that we're sitting here today in our homes and, the planet literally is not on fire around us, like in real time. We're not sitting, most of us anyway, are not sitting where we're being flooded out of our home right this second. And it's always difficult for human beings to, for us to find something urgent when it's not in our face, like right in front of us. And so we just have to keep talking about it and talking about it and talking about the science and talking about the data. I mean, this is a top issue for me. One of the the main reasons I'm running for Senate is because I have a 20-year-old son, Max. And anyone who's watching this, if you are a parent, you will understand what I'm about to say. I would do anything to save my son. including running for United States Senate. And I believe that we have got to get more regular people into positions of power to advocate for the most of us, for the majority of us, or this is not going to change. Things are not going to fundamentally change in the way that they must for us to all live lives of health and dignity, all of us, every one of us. My son said to me last summer, out of the blue, "Mama, I think I'm going to buy land in the middle north part of Canada." And I said, "Why, Max?" And he said, "Because I think it's the only place I might be able to live in like 30 years. And, that as a parent, you think about what your child's future is going to be like. And we have got to keep the climate at the forefront, or our children and grandchildren are not going to have a habitable planet. Do I think that a possible silver lining to the current crisis might be drastic reduction in air traffic, enabling us to vastly reduce our carbon footprint? And how could we continue with that reduction once the crisis is over? I think it will, if we collect data on the numbers now, what happens when we have less air traffic, what happens when we have fewer cars on the road, that's important data, and we can use that going forward to drive change. I think that that the ultimate takeaway, though, is that we have to be prepared. We have to be prepared. And, the climate crisis has the same potential for loss of life, if not greater, than COVID-19. And we have to keep that in all of our heads, that's true. So, and to back up, part of the Green New Deal for me would definitely be far more high-speed rail, much more high-speed rail, so that we would be able to replace some air traffic with high-speed electric rail, which would be fantastic. Would I be willing to subsidize small farming operations devoted to organic and sustainable agriculture? Yes. And here's a thought. How about if we have a farm bill? These farm bills come out every 4 years. How about if we had a farm bill that actually mitigated the climate crisis and made it so farming was no longer a non-profit enterprise, right? So that farmers could make a profit and make a decent living at farming. And we can do both. And would increase our local food supply and our local food security. We can do that, but we have to get United States senators in there who are aware of all these possibilities and know that with the right investments, we can make this happen. We can make it all happen. The Sustainable Iowa Land Trust is an amazing organization that is working toward a lot of these same exact goals. Practical Farmers of Iowa is a great organization that I was lucky to go spend a day at one of those Practical Farmers of Iowa farms last summer, and saw a farm where this gentleman has not purchased nitrogen in 30 years. And he has a farm that's doing pretty well and is very diversified. He's got some free-ranging cattle. He's got hogs. He grows, he always has cover crops on. He grows rye. He grows some oats. He grows corn for popcorn, for organic popcorn that he sells, markets and sells. There's this, I love all this agricultural stuff because it's so much opportunity there, but we have to make investments in small and medium farms and stop making investments in multinational agricultural corporations that do not need our investment anyway. What are my views on gun safety and gun control, banning the sales of assault weapons, background checks, waiting periods? Yes. If you go to KimberlyForIowa.com and you go to our issues page, you can click on the link to the March for Our Lives Peace Plan. The March for Our Lives Peace Plan. Those are my views on gun safety and control. I had a conversation with my dad maybe a year or so ago, 10 months ago. My dad was a Marine, as I mentioned earlier. My dad has owned multiple firearms his entire life, and he's been a hunter his whole life. And my dad is a Golden Eagle NRA member. My dad is a 50 plus year NRA member. And I was talking to my dad about the issue of guns. It probably was after some mass shooting. And I said, what are your thoughts about banning assault weapons, Dad? And he said, look, Kimmy, he said, if you need an assault weapon to hunt, you have no business hunting. And if you need an assault weapon for any other reason, you don't need one, because the only thing they're really good at is killing a lot of people in a short amount of time. And this is from a Marine, hunter, Golden Eagle NRA member. I think it is a complete myth that the majority of law-abiding, responsible gun owners are against common sense gun regulations. I think, in other words, I believe the vast majority, and what I've heard from gun owners myself, like my dad, is that the vast majority of responsible gun owners want increased regulation on firearms. How can we implement sensible gun laws without making gun owners fearful that we are trying to take their guns away? Yeah, I remember that when Obama was running for office, that everyone was going to lose their guns, and I don't think one gun was lost. So I think that's just honestly a lot of rhetoric. Yeah. And as I said, the majority of gun owners, I think, want sensible gun reform. So I think the majority of gun owners are with us on that. What do I support for campaign finance reform? Do I support democracy dollars, vouchers, which would allow voters to contribute to the campaigns of candidates with public money and no direct cost to themselves? Well, I think we should move to publicly funded elections, actually. So just like we say we value libraries, right? So we have these public libraries that we all pay for. I think we should all decide we value our government and that we value regular working people being able to run for office. And how we can make that happen most quickly is with publicly funded elections. If I had my way, you would get X dollars for X office, like depending on how much territory you're going to need to cover and how many people you were going to need to reach for whatever office you were running for. You'd get this much money and this much time. Go. And that's it. And you don't get more time. And I would cut back the election, the campaigning time a lot from what it is. And the next question is similar. What would I do in the Senate to achieve public funding of elections? I would introduce sponsor or co-sponsor bills to implement that kind of system. And the more U.S. senators like me that we get there, the faster that will happen. Do I support implementing ranked choice voting in elections? In this 5-candidate race, the winner could secure the nomination with 65% of the voters voting for a different candidate. Yeah, right. Yes, I do support ranked choice voting. Absolutely. And also, I'd like to put in a plug for voting by mail. I think that we should simply vote by mail. We should extend actually the time frame for that to be done this particular election more than we have extended it. And I really believe that the Iowa Secretary of State is making a major error in having any polling places open on June 2nd, unless some strange, weird thing happens and suddenly coronavirus is just like vanish. And I don't think that's going to happen unless COVID-19 vanishes. So regarding COVID-19, somebody asks, what congressional action is necessary to address the coronavirus pandemic? So a lot more than they've done. $1,200, even in Iowa, which doesn't have a super high cost of living compared to, say, Los Angeles or Chicago or New York or San Francisco area or many other places, $1,200 is frankly a joke and an insult to the American people, in my opinion, to hardworking, regular working people in America, right? that's a joke. That won't even get you, even in Iowa, that might get you a couple weeks, 2, 3 weeks of food, utilities, rent, whatever else you need to spend money on. So I would propose that we have sort of a stimulus of $2,000 per month for at least the next 3 months per adult. And that if somebody has dependent children, we might add an additional amount onto that for dependent children as well. We also need a moratorium in the short term on rent, utilities, and mortgage payments. And the reason I say mortgage payments is because if somebody is a kind of like small time landlord, if they own one home that they rent out, for example, and they have a mortgage on that, they also are going to still have to pay their mortgage, and they may not be in a position where they can continue to pay that mortgage right now either. I don't understand, frankly, why we can't get creative here, why we can't just simply cease rent and mortgage payments for now. And then, for example, if you have a mortgage, you might just tack those 3 or 4 payments that you couldn't make now onto the back end of your mortgage. So in other words, if your mortgage was going to be paid off in 2 years, it would now be paid off in 2 years and 3 months. So that certainly seems to be a smart way to handle what's happening. We should also be at a kind of wartime level of manufacturing of PPE for our healthcare workers. I don't understand why we didn't start manufacturing masks and other PPE a month ago on a massive scale. But really, it should have been a couple months ago, because it appears as though this could have been seen coming. We also need widespread free testing for COVID-19. That is key to containing this pandemic, and we need vaccinations to be free once the vaccinations are available. Would I have signed the COVID-19 stimulus bill? Yes, making a face the whole time, because I would have been really angry that it was throwing $1,200, not even a month. I was about to say $1,200 a month, $1,200 period, as a crumb to the masses, and that there was massive giveaways to multinational corporations in the stimulus bill. This is why we have to flip the Senate. This is why we have to flip the Senate, because it's absolutely horrific and ridiculous that the Republicans would only agree to that stimulus package if it contained a bunch of giveaways to the already wealthy. And not only that, at least that those giveaways were going to have some kind of oversight, but my understanding is now the Inspector General that was going to oversee those massive dollars to multinational corporations, that Inspector General has now been removed. So there will effectively be zero oversight. What's my position on UBI of universal basic income of $1,000 per month for every American adult for kids permanently until the end of their coronavirus? As I mentioned before, it definitely needs to be part of the COVID-19 relief strategy. And I think that would give us a really good opportunity to collect data about universal basic income as well, and look at potentially expanding it after COVID-19. I personally we can only focus on so much, right? We only have so much energy and time and capital to spend. One of my main focuses is increasing the minimum wage in this country, because that will help a lot of things. And another one of my focuses is providing healthcare to everyone as a human right, because if none of us had to pay high premiums, copays, deductibles, coinsurance, prescription costs, at a very high rate, that would put more money back in the pockets of regular working people as well. So, do I support repeal of the Hyde Amendment and protecting abortion rights? Yes, reproductive care should be fully covered under any single-payer model. Would I push vigorously for Congress to claim its responsibility for declaring or not declaring war? 100%. 100%. And it's time for Congress to start enforcing the War Powers Act. Absolutely. And side note, we need to fully fund the State Department because the State Department has absolutely been decimated under this current administration, and the State Department should be and has been how we save money on war. In other words, when we have a fully active State Department and active diplomacy going on, then we can prevent a lot of conflicts. Would I consider decriminalizing all nonviolent drug offenses? I would definitely consider it. I would want to start with marijuana. I'm 100% for decriminalization of marijuana. And I think we should have 100% federal legalization of marijuana for medical purposes. I have a family member, and I'm sure a lot of us do. I have a family member who lives with chronic pain, and this person's only choice has been opioids to deal with chronic pain, and could be very, very, very helped by having access to medical marijuana. And it also is becoming more absurd because as Illinois makes it legal, and then we have Colorado and so many other states, then it starts to get kind of ridiculous. If somebody who's desperate to be out of pain is just going to drive 15 minutes across the border, then we need to make sure that if marijuana becomes a nationwide industry, we also need to make sure that communities of color get the startup capital and help that they're going to need to make those businesses go and make those businesses happen. Because otherwise, we have again taken the already privileged who have access to all that startup capital and handed them a new market and a new way to become ever more wealthier without lifting up other communities when we have the opportunity to do so with the legalization of marijuana. How would I work with Republicans to make things happen, like healthcare, pharmaceutical costs, common sense gun laws, and other contentious issues? Again, I hope that my mediation skills are going to be helpful in that way, and that my knowledge of human nature and how people vote and people think about things with their heart and their head. Their heart and their gut, not their head. So people tend to vote with their heart and their gut. Their heart and their gut. And we, including me, likes to think that I'm just so critically analyzing all of this and weighing carefully the pros and cons and looking at the data. And that's true. That's definitely true. And our kind of gut feeling about things, or our emotions, are also what drastically drives the way that we look at issues. And so that is why stories and storytelling are so critically important. I mean, that's why when they have congressional hearings, right, they invite people who have been personally affected by these issues to come and tell their story in front of Congress, because those stories have a lot of impact. And I have to say, though, that given what happened with Merrick Garland, and how his nomination to the Supreme Court wasn't even allowed to come up for a vote, wasn't even allowed to come up for any kind of hearing or vote or anything, that makes me skeptical that the current GOP members of Congress, of the Senate especially, are that interested in listening. So we need to vote them out. How would I reach out to citizens in the more rural and more conservative areas of the state to assure them that I would represent them? I would do what I did and have been doing as a candidate. So I always tell people, if you want to know how someone's going to govern as your United States Senator, watch how they're campaigning. Watch how they're campaigning. Are they personally available to you to answer your questions? Have you met them in person before COVID-19? Did you meet them in person or see them at an event in your area? Or could you have? Did you know of them personally showing up in your county? I made it to 85, I think it was 85, 86, of our 99 counties. I put 40,000 miles approximately on my car starting last May through early March of this year, driving all over the state to listen to people. That is how you win as a Democrat in Iowa. You go everywhere and you listen to everyone. You guys, if J.D. Scholten last cycle came 2 points, 3 points, 2 or 3 points from beating Steve King in a supposedly bright red district, right? Then a Democrat can win the U.S. Senate in Iowa. A Democrat did win the U.S. Senate in Iowa for 30 years, Senator Tom Harkin. And Tom went everywhere and listened to everyone. And he truly and deeply cared about people, and you could tell. And he stood up and advocated for children and for families and for human rights, not just here, but all over the world. And he pushed that huge ball of the ADA up a hill until it finally got passed. So I just don't believe that we can't win in red counties. We can. JD did, and we will if we show up there and we listen to people. How would I approach the national debt? It was horrible before COVID-19, and now it will be off the charts. Yeah, well, it already was off the charts. Well, here's the thing. We have the money to pay down the debt. We just aren't doing it. We've got to be willing to appropriately tax the extraordinarily wealthy. And we have to implement monetary policies that are focused on poverty relief. We have to make those investments. I call them investments and not free this and free that for a reason, because they are investments. What the mistake that the GOP makes when they try to skimp on investments in people is that is going to create a downward spiral. I think that the GOP claims and wants to think that somehow if you take away someone's food assistance, that's going to just like inspire them to go out and get a better paying job. Well, that's not how this works, because there aren't, you'd have to change so many things about other factors of our society, like, for instance, education. Right now, we fund education based on local property taxes. That means if you live in an area with low property tax values, your schools are poorly funded. If you live in an area with high property tax values, your school is going to get all the things it needs. It's going to get orchestra and band and pay its teachers well and have buildings that aren't crumbling down on the heads of the kids while they're trying to learn, and on and on and on, right? And so we've got to equally fund our schools and double resource our schools that need extra resources, because those kids are already struggling with a major risk factor for them, which is poverty. And we've got to make investments. They're called investments for a reason. So we've got to get more people into the House of Representatives and the United States Senate who believe and know that those investments will pay off, and we've got to do that, and then we will be able to pay down the debt. Last question. Personally, a good day for me is a day when I make a new friend and learn something new. Tell us about something you learned today or a new friend. The first thing that comes to mind, because I just did a forum on immigration at 11 a.m. today, is something I learned during that forum. And I wish I could say that it was something uplifting. It's not. I learned from Sonia Paras Conrad, who is an immigration attorney, has been an immigration attorney for about 20 years here in the Des Moines area. Fantastic immigrant activist. She herself is originally from Spain. And I was lucky to go to law school with her. And she was one of our guests on the immigration forum. And she was talking about how she used to be able to get a stable immigration status for a person who was a survivor of domestic violence, domestic abuse. She used to be able to get that person to a stable immigration status within maybe 6-7 months, something like that. Now, it takes about 9 years for Sonia, working as an immigration attorney, to be able to get this person who is fleeing from domestic abuse, has been a victim of crime, to get them a stable immigration status. And so that's something I learned today. I had no idea. We can make changes to all this, but we have to get enough people who want those changes into positions of power, and we have to continue our grassroots on the ground activism, because that does put the right pressure on the people in positions of power to make those changes. Our campaign team and volunteers watched a movie virtually together last night on Netflix. There's this extension you can install in your browser called Netflix Party, so that you can all watch the same movie at the same time and then type in a chat, like make comments to each other. So we watched a film last night called Crip Camp, or was it Camp Crip? I hope I didn't get that wrong. It's one of those two. And it was about this camp for handicapped young people back in the, I believe, probably like late 1960s, it looked like. And it followed the lives of all of these young people who had gone to this summer camp, and how many of them became activists that ended up being activists all the way up and through Tom Harkin's Americans with Disabilities Act. And because of those activists who at one time occupied, I believe it was one of the Health and Human Services buildings, these disability activists, people with disabilities who were also disability activists, occupied this building for, it was days and days, if not weeks. And then the public started showing up outside the building to support them and bring them food. And the Teamsters Union came and helped them get transportation when they were doing some other activities and they couldn't find any accessible public transportation. Other labor unions helped them with various things. The Black Panther Party came and fed them and brought them food. Just all of these grassroots, like, organizations and people that cared about these issues affecting typically marginalized and traditionally marginalized communities came and supported them. So we still have to come at this from all different angles. We have to come at this from the top down, but mostly the bottom up. And so I decided to run for U.S. Senate because we need to be representing us. And if we don't start stepping up and running for office, we get what we get, and I don't like what we've been getting. So if you want to find out more about our campaign, please go to kimberlyforiowa.com, kimberlyforiowa.com. I'm sorry that this has been such a long video, but I hope that it's been helpful and that you understand more about our positions and priorities with this campaign. I hope you will join us and support us and get your absentee ballot request form in, get your absentee ballot back. I would ask for your vote and your support in this June 2nd primary, and stay very well. And I hope to see you in person very soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.